There's only one topic to cover today, and I got a lot to say about it, as we're going to be talking about Benjamin Netanyahu's UN address that he delivered yesterday on September 26, 2025. The reason that this speech is making such headlines is because it seems like a majority of the UN representatives walked out before Netanyahu started speaking.
Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall, and please be seated.
If I were those UN representatives, I would be a little bit scared. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like Netanyahu's mouthing, yeah, I'll remember that. Trust me, I'll remember that you did that you walked out on the great state of Israel. If we take a look at the room after the walkout and when Netanyahu starts speaking, it does seem like a majority of the representatives actually walked out before Netanyahu's speech. And honestly, I kind of applaud them for that, because what else can you do when the UN Council introduces Netanyahu as His Excellency, and then he's been ruled a criminal by the International Criminal Court? The UN themselves has condemned Netanyahu multiple times for the Israelis' actions in Gaza. And then you have the fact that they have bombed multiple reporters. A lot of the reporters probably coming from the countries that are walking out of Netanyahu's speech. So honestly, I don't blame them. What else can you do? And after listening to Netanyahu's speech, which we're going to talk about in its full entirety, I see why they walked out even more. And the reason for that is because Netanyahu's speech is layered with fallacies, lies, exaggerations, and manipulation tactics. So let's take a look and actually start breaking down his speech. Netanyahu starts his speech off by showing a map of what he considers to be Iran's terror axis.
It shows the curse of Iran's terror axis. This axis threatened the peace of the entire world.
First of all, the reason that he calls it an axis is so that way you associate it with the most evil of the evil that the world has ever seen. Because notoriously, the Axis is what they called the enemies, the opposing side during World War II. And then I couldn't help but notice the eerie similarities that this speech echoes to a speech that Netanyahu gave back in 2002, testifying to the US Congress. What Netanyahu says now as he paints the picture crossing off these nations on the map seems like the series of victories that he was referring to back in 2002.
The Assad regime in Syria, gone. If they attack Israel, we'll also be gone. Iran's top military commanders and his top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too.
The first victory in Afghanistan makes the second victory in Iraq that much easier. The second victory in Iraq will make the third victory that much easier too, but it may change the nature of achieving that victory.
This exposes Netanyahu's playbook, because it's quite obvious, in my opinion, that this is his plan for the regime change wars that he would like to enact. This is his vision for what could one day be greater Israel. In my opinion, it could go way beyond Gaza. I'm not saying that's for sure what Netanyahu or the Israeli government's plan is, but take a look at this next clip where Netanyahu discusses how Iran was developing ballistic missiles and furthering their nuclear program.
Iran was rapidly developing a massive nuclear weapons program and a massive ballistic missile program. These were meant not only to destroy Israel, they were meant also to threaten the United States and blackmail nations everywhere.
What Netanyahu says right there is almost an exact mirror of what he said about Iraq back in 2002.
Today, the United States must destroy the same regime because a nuclear-armed Saddam will place the security of our entire world at risk.
So it seems like Netanyahu back in 2002 was convinced that Iraq was developing WMDs, or weapons of mass destruction. Now Netanyahu is convinced that they're developing ballistic missiles and furthering the nuclear program in Iran. Seems like it's echoing the exact same sentiment. And in my opinion, like he was wrong back in 2002 when the US found no weapons of mass destruction after overthrowing the Iraqi government, I think Netanyahu wants to do the same thing with the Iranian government and bait the US into war with Iran. Which is why in 2002 and in 2025, Netanyahu makes it perfectly clear that if Iran or Iraq is able to develop these nuclear weapons, they're not just going to stop with Israel. They're definitely going to inflict these weapons on the United States and the rest of the world. Why does Netanyahu pick the United States specifically? Well, I don't know. It might have something to do with the $3.8 billion the United States gives to Israel every single year. But it also might have something to do with the fact that we were victim to a heinous terror attack ourselves. So when Netanyahu says it, we're more likely to believe it. And if we believe it, the United States is ultimately the superpower of the Western world. So if we believe it, all the other Western powers believe it too. Netanyahu, while listing his victories of the last year, makes sure to mention the pager attack that occurred in Lebanon on Hezbollah.
We crippled Hezbollah, taking out most of its leaders and much of its weapons arsenal. You remember those beepers, the pagers? We paged Hezbollah. And believe me, they got the message.
And I'll give Israel this. The pager attack on Hezbollah was clearly a very precise, complicated, well-planned maneuver that seemed to be very successful in achieving the Israeli objectives. So that begs the question, if you were able to do that and you have the intelligence to do that to a different sovereign nation in Lebanon with a more complicated, bigger terror group in Hezbollah, how come you're not able to do that with Hamas when Netanyahu allegedly sends a message to every cell phone in Gaza, but yet can't seem to coordinate any attack like he did on Hezbollah? Just let's drop bombs on every single building we think terrorists are in, and there's definitely civilians in. Shortly thereafter, he goes on to thank President Trump for his decisive action and helping him deal with Iran.
Israeli fighter pilots and American B-2 pilots bombed Iran's nuclear enrichment sites. I want to thank President Trump for his bold and decisive action.
Trump's decision to bomb Iran will be forever remembered as a permanent stain on his presidency. For the guy who ran on no new wars, for him to openly help Israel bomb Iran, starting what even Netanyahu calls a 12-day war, is a direct lie based on what Trump ran against. And Trump can no longer say that no wars started under him or that he didn't start any wars. And you might say, well, it was only a 12-day war. Israel lost 28 people during that 12-day war, and Iran lost over 600, with over 7,000 between both sides injured. So you tell me, it sounds like a pretty substantial major conflict to me. Netanyahu then points out a QR code that's placed on his shirt. And the reason he points it out is he says that the world has forgotten about October 7th. Not saying that I think people should forget about October the 7th, because it was a very heinous terror attack, and I don't condone it at all. But for Netanyahu to say the world has forgotten about October the 7th is almost laughable, because it has been mentioned every single day. I have heard it every single day between Piers Morgan, social media, the Israel PR team, Fox News. I hear about October the 7th every single day. Like I said, I'm not saying that it's something that we should just forget about. It was a terrible terror attack. But does it mean that we should use it as an excuse for the be-all and end-all for the rest of time? Nothing justifies October the 7th in the Israeli point of view But October the 7th justifies everything. He does mention the prospect of a peace deal, but take a listen to what Netanyahu says are the terms for said peace deal with Hamas.
Hamas agrees to our demands, the war could end right now. Gaza would be demilitarized, Israel would retain overriding security control, and a peaceful civilian authority would be established by Gazans and others committed to peace with Israel.
Translation, Netanyahu says, as long as we can have overriding security in your territory and also get to put a government that's created by Gazans and others, as he puts it, that would be committed to having a good relationship with Israel, so basically a puppet government for Israel, then Hamas could have peace. That's all they need to do. That's the simple terms they need to agree to. And because this is a comedy show, I guess, in order to get across his point of how terrible these organizations are, he gives the UN representatives a pop quiz.
A, Iran, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, the Houthis, or E, all of the above. All of the above. Americans and Europeans in cold blood. Is it A, Al-Qaeda, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, Iran, or E, all of the above? Correct.
Did you notice that from the first question to the second question, he replaced the Houthis with Al-Qaeda because there's probably no documented history of the Houthis ever doing anything to Americans or Europeans? The whole goal of this is to make sure that you know that Israel, the tiny, tiny nation of Israel, is acting as a buffer state, and they're protecting you from crazy Islamists and terrorism from just being all over the world. And that begs the question, why do Islamists shout death to America? Allegedly it's because they hate our freedom, but a lot of countries are free. How come they never say death to Australia or chant against Italy or Germany or Sweden? How come it's always death to America? Maybe it's because we help Israel and they hate Israel? We donate over $3.8 billion a year to help them inflict attacks on these countries. And then every president from Bush to Obama to Biden to Trump, none of them stop it and all contribute to it. So maybe that's why they chant death to America. Not saying it's right. I'm an American. I love this country. And I do think that there is radical Islamists out there who probably do hate America. But why America? You have to ask the question based on a logic standpoint. Geographically, all those other countries are listed are way closer. We have an ocean separating us from them. In theory, we have nothing to do with them and they have nothing to do with us. But because we buy into the Israel propaganda, that somehow Israel is this barricade that protects us from all terrorism across the world, is absolute bullcrap. And I noticed a few times in this speech, Netanyahu tries to appeal to right-wing conservatives in America and Western European countries by saying, I know you've dealt with these crazy Islamists, that you have them in your country and they're committing these terror attacks. Well, that begs the question. I thought Israel was supposed to be protecting us. I thought you guys were stopping the Islamists, the crazy people, these terrorists allegedly, from coming to our countries. So how come we're all so familiar with it if Israel is supposed to be this great shield? Netanyahu uses that as a bridge to brag about Israeli intelligence. Listen to how he describes Israeli intelligence in comparison to the United States.
If the United States had to gather on its own the intelligence that Israel gives us, we would have to establish 5 CIAs. 5 CIAs.
So apparently, Israel has the intelligence equal to 5 CIAs. 5 CIAs. Even Netanyahu emphasizes it because of how ridiculous it sounds. But despite Israel having all this intelligence and being able to coordinate that amazing pager attack, as he said earlier, they weren't able to see October the 7th coming at all. Not at all, that this major coordinated attack was being planned on your nation. And despite Israel being the size of New Jersey, we're not able to respond to it for multiple hours. These were questions that even Charlie Kirk, somebody that Netanyahu himself said has a massive love for Israel and was planning to visit Israel, even he asked these questions.
When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that is an IDF soldier. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration, right? He said the judicial branch has too much power. There were protests planned this week against Netanyahu, where they anticipated tens of thousands of people to take to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government and a mandate to lead. I'm not willing to go so far that saying that Netanyahu knew or there was intelligence here, but I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand down order? 6 hours? I don't believe it. Israel's the size of New Jersey. When I took a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Gaza border, it's 45 minutes.
And it's a good question that Charlie Kirk asked, because if they have all this intelligence, as Netanyahu himself says, 5 CIAs, how could they not see that coming? How could the response be so crappy? Netanyahu then goes on to make a statement that I think exposes a very scary playbook that he's going to follow.
Horrors praised on that day by nearly 90% of the Palestinian population. And let me say that again. Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. It's not supported only, they celebrated it.
He's saying that it's not just Hamas, that it's the Palestinian Authority, it's the Palestinian people en masse. And the way that him and Zionists describe anti-Semitism, almost as if it's some sort of incurable disease that gets implanted in people, it doesn't make me doubt that Netanyahu and the Israeli government's intention could be for 90% of that population to get wiped out. And with that, take a listen to this quote of how Netanyahu describes how the Palestinians were celebrating after October the 7th and celebrating after the Twin Towers attack.
And it's just the way they celebrated another horror, 9/11. They danced on the rooftops.
Dancing on the rooftops, you say? Sounds familiar, almost like this dancing Israelis story that I've heard of. When Netanyahu said that, I screamed, I burst into laughter, I almost cried. I couldn't describe the emotions I was under, because it felt like Netanyahu was directly poking fun at people who have heard of the dancing Israeli story. I'm not sure if anybody besides Netanyahu himself would be sure if he did that on purpose, with wording that the exact same way as what the Israelis were doing on the rooftops in New York City. But man, it definitely seems like it. And I think I'm gonna end it there, because if not, I'm gonna start talking about things that I probably shouldn't talk about on YouTube. But do yourself a favor. Google the Dancing Israelis ABC story. Look it up on X. You'll be in for a mighty fine treat. But that's all I got for you guys today. I knew I wouldn't have the energy to address more topics after dealing with such an outraging speech such as Netanyahu's. But please let me know what you would like me to cover in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of the UN representatives actually walking out on Netanyahu's speech, and what you thought of Netanyahu's speech itself. But anyway, hit like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Make sure you guys stay safe out there. Peace out.